Hello and welcome to another episode of David's Divergence. I'm your host, David Hammond. Today, Tanya Adkin and Rachel Gavin, and we're going to talk about neurodivergence and social work. So we'll start with a brief order. So I'm David Graham, a mid-30s male presenting person with a shaved head, a beard. I'm wearing a blue and black tie-dye top, thick rimmed glasses. I have a lip piercing and an ear tunnel, and I am sat in a very blue room next to the famously rickety bookcase. And Tanya, do you want to do a description?
Yeah, I am a 30-something-year-old female presenting person with shoulder-length blonde hair, clear rimmed glasses, and I'm sat in a white room. It looks white. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm Rachel Gavin, excuse me, independent social worker. I am 40. I have long brown hair with a bit of blonde in, all tied up, and I am in a junk room at the moment because it's the only quiet place in the house.
Great. So yeah, we're going to talk about neurodivergence and social care. Feel free to chime in during this live with questions that you want. So social care. Let's start with Tanya. What's your relationship?
Well. So I actually started when I was like a long time ago, and I was like 19 years old in kind of what was then known as Deaf and Disabled Children's Services. So before I even knew that I was autistic or had autistic children, I was kind of in that field anyway, and then bounced around like some, different kind of stuff. So obviously with the local authority, and then into mental health, then some elderly stuff, then some DV stuff, so all of that kind of stuff. But what is my relationship with social care currently? So I started after doing an awful lot of SEND advocacy and autism stuff, kind of getting to the point where social care was the kind of missing piece of the puzzle for me, because it's like, education, okay, tick, got that. Autism stuff, oh, tick, got that. Now, when you're looking at things for kids like EHCPs, it's education, health and care, social care. And then I met our colleague, Mary Cartledge, just over 3 years ago now. And I think we've worked together since then. So me and Mary have worked together since then. And Rachel, I think it's been a couple of years for you as well, haven't you? So yeah. The three of us have just kind of like worked together really in social care, and mainly because we're all neurodivergent. That's what we do, because unfortunately neurodivergence is massively misunderstood,
Okay. So, yeah. Rachel, do you want to...
I realised that was a massive monologue. I wasn't even expecting. It just came.
Do you your background, Rachel?
Yeah, it's a bit of a hefty one. Okay, so I'm 40 now, so I started working in social care when I was 18. So I started as a support worker, and I was working with children and adults, and I've worked in mental health. I've worked with neurodivergent children and adults majority of my time. I've worked in learning disability services, I've worked in forensic services, and I've worked in child protection services. So I've purposely done that over the years and varied my experience. I always knew that I was going to go and work independently in the future. So I tried to get as much experience as I could prior to doing so. And then in 2021, roughly, I went independent then. So yeah, I've been around for quite some time in social care. Yeah, a lot of different experiences. Worked alongside, as I said, forensics and in mental health as well. So I worked alongside approved mental health professionals. So that was working with neurodivergent children and young people who would come into contact with services really, and to be support. The reason why going out with the doctors and the AMPs for short was because of the lack, if I'm honest, of the lack of knowledge around neurodivergence. So that's why I used to go out and do a lot of assessments, because what I'd find, especially going to whether it be residential units, for want of a better word, or hospitals where someone, a young person or an adult, may be detained, I would be involved in looking at that as well, in terms of that, the environment, the issues there, because the knowledge just isn't there in mental health.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely agree.
And I think that's, yeah, that's kind of across the board, isn't it, in terms of mental health and neurodivergence? It's missing.
Yeah. So even in statutory services, if there was a concern and a young person was really struggling, whether that be in the community or in some sort of residential setting, then it would usually be legal services. Like even when I was in statutory services, a lawyer or someone would contact me for help if they've got some concerns, because as I say, you two will already know this, the knowledge of mental health, autism, and co-occurring conditions and lots of things just isn't there. So I've spent a lot past few years doing that before I went independent, and still work in that area. Really, I've got I would say Tanya and I've got a very varied range of experience in independent work as well.
Yeah, there's not really anything that we don't cover.
No.
You know, even because I think it comes down to that fundamental knowledge of mental health and neurodivergence and the way that people look at it, and even attitude. So even, we do things that aren't necessarily autism focused. Occasionally we do that, but we are sought out for autistic stuff, obviously.
Yeah.
But even when you're looking at things that aren't necessarily autism focused or situations that have arisen, it's very driven by that kind of medical model, kind of sexist, old school narrative, isn't it? Because that's the way that everything's kind of driven. So I think realistically, being part of the neurodivergent community does give us a benefit in that way, because we're more social model and environment focused, help focused, rather than, this person is bad or this person needs to be fixed. So and we cover, what don't we do? We do everything. A lot of fabricated and induced illness.
Yes, an awful lot. Yeah.
And just for anybody listening, that's where parents, usually mothers, get accused of something that could potentially look like Munchausen syndrome by proxy, but not, because it's not actually a diagnosable psychiatric condition. It's just basically where doctors decide they don't know what the crack is, so mum must be making it up. And it is sexist, because it's usually always mum, apparently, and it does disproportionately affect autistic mothers because of that double empathy, communication issue, attention to detail, communication styles, etc. So we do a lot of that. We do a lot of capacity stuff, don't you, Rach?
Yes, do a lot of capacity, 16 plus, Yeah,
and that's really misunderstood as well when it comes to autistic experience, because it's often conflated with learning disability, which it is not.
Yeah, I just, if I had my way, obviously it's not possible really, but if I had my way, you would not assess a child, young person or an adult who didn't have that background experience. You should not be doing any kind of assessments, which realistically is not going to happen, is it? But in the ideal world, you cannot, as a professional, be doing assessments without that knowledge.
And and the thing is, but even though if they have got that knowledge, we can't talk too much about what we do, but the most highly decorated and qualified people in the land don't have that fundamental autism knowledge.
True. Very true. Yeah.
And this was a problem. This was a problem I saw a lot myself, because obviously in my own background, my degree's in forensic science. I worked consulting way back when, working with service commissioners, representing the treatment rights of autistic and neurodivergent substance use. There was a lot of work around things like drug-related deaths and all of this. This happening. Why is that happening? They're going, well, it's this neurodivergent related thing that you know nothing about, yet somehow you're in charge of a service that largely deals with neurodivergent people. It was a real problem. An advocate, I do a lot of advocacy, especially in the mental health, although I do a fair bit regarding education. There's just not the knowledge there amongst professionals who really should have the knowledge.
Yeah, and it is an area of interest for me, looking at competency, so professional competency. So I've had a lot of informal discussions with lots and lots of different professionals and asked about the training that's received in local authorities and the health boards. It's pretty basic. Pretty basic stuff.
It's extremely basic, and this is the problem. Like, I think what happens is people are always finding a very quick fix way of doing things, can we do like a half an hour training course, or can we do a day's training course, and all of a sudden we're going to be up to date on autism knowledge? And it's like, no, you can't, pal. No. And I think that's probably why we all work together, isn't it? Because I think we all cross each other's kind of specialisms in a way, but that helps really, because you've got you're really good with learning disability in adults and capacity, and Mary is really, really, really good with child protection, and we all cross over and do a bit of that. But then I'm kind of the autism, so it kind of works together.
Yeah,
in a really kind of way. But it's a mess.
When we're sort of thinking about neurodivergent people and social care, let's go back to basics. What are the things that neurodivergents know about their rights and what they're entitled to in terms of?
Well, this is an interesting one, because it depends very much on the skill of the assessor. And also, even though they will deny that things are service-led rather than needs-led, we all know that's a load of crap, So it's difficult. I mean, everybody is entitled to request an assessment of need for an adult, and the criteria is pretty straightforward. It's things like maintaining relationships, maintaining a habitable home, managing and maintaining nutrition, all of those things. But it can be a little bit like going for a PIP assessment sometimes, where if you say that you can prick something and whack it in the microwave for 3 minutes, then therefore you can manage and maintain all of your nutrition and it's fine. So it is open to interpretation, and that's the difficulty. So what are they entitled to? Depends on the assessment and on what the assessment says. And that's the tricky thing about social care. Like in education law, for example, it is very, very clear, and there is very specific rules and standardized assessments and so on and so forth. But social care is so much more down to professional opinion and the skill of the assessor.
But if a person's approaching social care, what sort of things might they be looking for?
Oh, so what sort of things can the social care provide? Well, again, that comes down to the skill of the assessor, doesn't it, Rach?
Yeah, skill of the assessor. And like a lot of people ask this question, but we're the three of us, we're very needs led. So we literally think about what really would make a difference and be quite supportive to this person, and then use the resources that are there, like, access to direct payments, lots of other things to build that support network, the resources, the provision package. But every time someone will ask me, well, what can social services provide? It's a difficult question, because from our side of things, as in the three of us, you know, we can do spoke, because again, it comes back to skills as well, doesn't it? Competency, and you know what would be quite helpful for someone, and you discuss those with someone, but then they are they shouldn't be, but they are restricted in statutory services. But then going back to what Tanya said, we should be needs-led, not resource-led, but at the same time those resources aren't necessarily there.
This is it. Fundamentally, you could be asking for things like provision for a cleaner or care hours and care and support hours. That's fundamentally where adult social care usually go with things, isn't it? Like care hours and stuff like that. So to do shopping, cleaning, cooking, get you to appointments and so on and so forth. And that's really it, isn't it? Because when we look at the role of a social worker, so that's exactly right. Bobby's saying the resources aren't there. So when we look at ethically the role of a social worker, we've got kind of like two jobs, which is obviously looking after the welfare and safeguarding of people, but the other one is to ensure the equitable distribution of resources. So fundamentally, we've got a safeguarding hat and a resource distribution hat. We're supposed to have resources that we're able to distribute that help like disabled people, disabled children, people that are in need, and so on and so forth. When you strip back those resources, what are we left with? Blame. You know? So what can you expect from social care? You can definitely expect an assessment. Absolutely. You can complain at the outcome of that assessment and use evidence. But it's really difficult to secure those resources that aren't there. There are ways that it can be done. For example, if you're under 26 via an EHCP, what are the other ways it can be secured, Rach?
Well, generally, if an assessment is, if it's not, say, a local authority did a social care assessment and the outcomes of that assessment is not felt to meet the individual's needs, then the next you go to would then be advocacy services to go through the complaints process. So there's not an awful lot other than that to do, which is really tricky for people. But there is a duty now around advocacy services within local authorities to access as well. And someone has also commented, depends on what the core offer of social care is in that LA. And yeah, they do have the core offer, don't they? And the again, the issues with that is that's actually quite resource led, and what, you know, if someone's needs can't be met with the resources that the local authority are offering in their local offer usually, then, and that happens a lot with our assessments, doesn't it, Tanya, where we've got to go outside of that because it doesn't meet need. So we've got to we should be assessing with bespoke in mind to make sure we can meet an individual's needs, and the local offer that you'll see in local authorities' websites isn't always.
Yeah, and I don't think that social care have the resources to do that outside of the box thinking anymore. They all want to rely on tools and checkboxes because they're so under-resourced that they don't really have that freedom of movement. And I think there's an awful lot of safeguarding fear within local authorities as well, isn't there? So they don't want to move away from like specific tools and specific resources. So that's where
I usually find it better within and a lot of people wouldn't agree, but in adult services, because they in a sense it's not as process driven in adult services in terms of tick boxes. So there should be a bit more scope. Should be able for practitioners to have a little bit more out of the box thinking, whereas in children's it tends to be a little bit more process driven in terms of what forms you have to fill in and how you go about that. But it's like a postcode lottery, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm really cynical. Well, obviously, you know, I'm very cynical anyway, but
yeah.
Children's is very like the wild, wild west, because I think they basically just want to hold them until they're 16. But the thing is, adult services tend to be a little bit better, not all the time. And when I'm saying better, I don't mean good. I just mean better than the, you know, abomination that is children's services currently. But they tend to be better because obviously if they're supporting somebody, they're potentially supporting them long term. They're not palming them off onto education or onto health so much. Like the book tends to stop more with social care, especially in terms of mental health as well.
Mental health, yeah.
And learning disability.
So
yeah, and within adult and disability, there's a mix usually. So you normally get multidisciplinary learning disability teams in social care teams. So they're usually quite helpful teams. But what there is a major issue, it's either a learning disability adults team or a mental health adults team, and there are lots of people who will be missing in that gap. And they wouldn't be eligible for one, not eligible for the other. So then what when they've got eligible needs? So that's a common issue across the UK as well.
Yeah.
So I go back to obviously local authority, different sort of core offers. And something I've come across independent advocacy work is plus policies. People what
Yeah. So it's not so bad now because there's been a lot of kind of like since Cerebra and Professor Luke Clements did a big thing about autism plus policies, which basically exclude autistic people or autistic young people without learning disabilities from disabled children's services. So a lot of that has changed. And even though it may have changed in writing per se, in the writing of the policy, in the actual practicality, it hasn't changed. Fundamentally, if I was just going to do a sweeping statement, I would say that we're almost, I think the lack of funding and the lack of investment in local authority services is leading to basically the disillusion of disabled children's services or any service that isn't safeguarding led, really.
Yeah. I mean, the setup of early help doesn't help either with children with disabilities because it's a safeguarding lens. The assessment, the immediate tends to be through a safeguarding lens. If you look at what they're using in terms of their tools, even when there is a child or young person with no safeguarding concerns, it's still kind of going through that route. It doesn't go directly to the children's disability team or any other team really. So everything support wise, EHCP is always the best route in my opinion.
Always the
Yeah.
best route.
Yeah.
And people, I just wanted to point out as well that people really misunderstand this, that people think that if something is in the EHCP and it's not in section F, then that means that it's just a recommendation and local authorities don't have to adhere to it. But fundamentally, if that need has been assessed as necessary and a judge has made a recommendation, that is a judicial recommendation. So the kind of the path to resolving that not being served is still judicial review, the same as it would in section F. Even local authorities get that wrong. Oh, it's just a recommendation. Yes, pal, it's a judicial recommendation. Would you like to go and explain to a judicial review why you are not fulfilling your duties as a public body and fulfilling this judicial recommendation? So those paths are still open. But yeah, it's always going to be for under 26ers via the HCP route. And fundamentally, when we write as well, we write specifically to ensure that a lot of the provision that we provide is or recommend is education and training based, because it fundamentally is.
Yeah, well, education training needs, isn't it? A lot of parents, or lots of people will say, how do we get directed straight to a child disabilities team? You don't. And if you've got an EHCP, go through the EHCP. And not many people talk about that, Tanya.
No, I don't. I think it's because social care is such a it's kind of, I think even in EHCP kind of territory or disabled children territory or in like the groups and things, I think that people assume that social care is safeguarding, or actually it's probably the fact that if they approach social care in one way or another, all that's waiting is parent blame, which is very true in some cases. So it tends to be for us that we get brought in, when there is FII, when there is child protection concerns, which fundamentally 99% of the time are literally, when it's autistic children, is literally parent blame on steroids, or or when the young person may need a residential setting or EOTAS provision, because a lot of the stuff that we would recommend is in the chronically sick and disabled children's, but actually, and this is a real misunderstanding as well, even by tribunal judges, they don't understand social care law that well, because the recommendations for social care is that we should only really be recommending things that's in the Chronically Sick and Disabled Children's Act. That's in the same code of practice. But actually, if you dig a little deeper, Section H2 is anything that can contribute to the welfare of the young person. And tribunal judges like things really ticked off. So how many times have we had that argument, Rach?
Every tribunal. So I'm having to explain social care law in pretty much every tribunal. So
and barristers. Don't forget the barristers.
Barristers more so. Yeah, and that's not a criticism to any barristers or lawyers. It's just it's not their it's not their professional experience, is it? So yes, the tribunal do have a way to go.
But they are getting better with it, because they are opened up now by national trial, which means they can comment on this stuff, which is great. But I just wanted to comment actually on trying to access a disabled children's social worker. They're not necessarily any better than an early help or a child protection social worker. They really aren't, because they're still looking through that lens of safeguarding. That it's a fundamental kind of corporate attitude, really. But they are, a social worker is a social worker, regardless of what team they work in, regardless of whether most of their experience is in adults or children's, or whether, fundamentally it's going to be about that social worker's experience. And
they could be anywhere. They could be anywhere within that local authority. They may not be working in a particular team. They could be in an older person's team, just happen to be very experienced, personal experience, and lots of other things.
So it's
luck of the draw, if I'm honest.
No, and I think the thing with disabled children's teams as well, right, is actually sometimes it's worse, especially if your autistic child doesn't have cognitive difficulties, for example, because usually the criteria for getting to a disabled children's team is so narrow that, they've got to be attending a school for multiple and profound learning disabilities, or they've got to be physically or they've got to be on oxygen, and so on and so forth. So what happens is when parents finally fight and get allocated a disabled children's worker, and their young person may have a diagnosis of PDA and be academically able, for example, because we all know how services love to conflate academic ability and disability. It's almost like you get gaslit by the disabled children's worker then. Like you're taking space from somebody who is more visibly disabled, or things like that. So it's not necessarily better to have a disabled children's social worker at all. I'd say fundamentally sometimes worse, because
there's a bigger issue as well in terms of directors and those higher up, because I've looked at a lot of eligibility criteria for children with disabilities teams, and they're actually unlawful. And I'm thinking, you've got legal teams within the local authorities, and if anyone was to take that forward, considering a legal team are there to protect the local authority, I'm quite surprised that these criteria are there.
Yeah, but Rachel, we all know about local authority legal teams, don't we?
We do.
They're not very disclaimer, not all local teams.
If I might circle back for a minute, because some people might not know, Tanya and I have in the Creating Autistic Suffering series, we talk a lot about parent blame, actually, don't we? I feel like it comes up a lot in our writing.
Yeah.
And things that's really important to note here is that when you've got neuro who need support from social care, you often have the parents who are in the caring position neurodivergent. They don't necessarily know they're neurodivergent, but let's be honest, neurodivergent children come from somewhere, and it's not from outer space. case. You've got neurodivergent, really know they're neurodivergent. They're probably entitled to a carer's assessment or something. But again, like they don't know, or it's just never done, or they've had one and been told they're not allowed any support. And I wondered if we could talk a bit about what is a carer's assessment actually supposed to do as someone in a care.
Hold my beer.
I love that saying, hold my beer.
Here we go. So here's the thing about social care assessments, and this is why lots of legal people don't really understand the scope of social care law, because a lot of social care law is open to interpretation and doesn't have much case law specifically defining it. For example, significant harm you would think would have a very clear definition. It doesn't. It's open to interpretation. The carers' rights, the rights to well-being are very, very clearly defined. So, you have a right to contribute towards the community. You have a right to be free from abuse. You have a right to education or employment and all these things and stuff like that. But actually, the way that social care has gone, because it's so resource-led, is they won't come. So, for example, here's a perfect example, right? They won't come until the building is already on fire. So if a parent, for example, says, okay, I've got no money, I really need to go out and work, but I can't go to interviews because little Alfie's not been in school for 18 months, therefore I need someone to look after little Alfie before I go to interviews. Social worker turns around and goes, yeah, well, you've got a right to work, not got a right to go to interviews. So therefore, when you get a job, we'll provide someone to look after little Alfie. Or they'll go, actually, that's education. Why don't you send him to a provision that can't meet his needs while you're waiting a year for a tribunal date to come up, because the tribunal's so overloaded? They will do things like when, I don't know, somebody's got challenging behavior, and that's a whole other rant that we won't go on right now, but I've written about this extensively. They will say, oh, have a parenting course, or mum's not coping, or it's mum's anxiety. It's always mum as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
As if dad just sits there and does nothing. There is always a way to not give the resources that aren't available. And actually, what the local authorities do with their local offers is they're really, really good at milking free stuff and making it seem like they're providing support. Like, for example, I know that there is one particular local authority that both me and Rachel are fully aware of that love an FII accusation without calling it FII. The list as a provision for a parent that is apparently not coping on child protection with their mental health, because it's always conceptualized as that, a free Facebook group for support. That's their provision for mental health support.
In the carers assessment.
Yeah. So
the funny thing is, you have assessments which are supposed to, make sure that the carer has the support so you don't have the breakdown of the family unit. What they actually do is, like you said, they wait till the house is on fire and then go parents' fault.
So say it was say a child had an assessment for social care needs, the carer has equally the same rights as the child for the assessment in their own right in law. That's in law. But what I often I speak to lots of families who've showed me previous carers assessments, and what they often do, and you may find the same, Tanya, they're just a description of the carer's life and how they're feeling at the moment, but there's never any provision in it, or very rare I'll see an actual.
Yeah, and you can go through the process again. You can go through the complaints process again. Yeah. But the thing is, complaints trigger off parent blame and fear.
They do. They're a massive trigger.
Thing, the biggest one, complaints. So actually, the best way to do it is via the bloody EHCP.
Yeah.
Because I don't know about you, Rachel, but when we do like an assessment for a young person or a child, I mean, we've got our own bespoke templates and stuff that we use because of the context that's needed for autistic young people and then neurodivergent families, which I made because, I'm clever like But yeah, so once we've actually, so when we're doing like so we do section 17 assessments, which is a child in need assessment, which every disabled child is basically a child in need, and that covers something that's done by the Common Assessment Framework. And there's loads of different very woolly kind of areas, you know, like basic care needs, emotional warmth, like identity and all that and the other. And the way that that is usually looked at by social care is through a lens of safeguarding. But what we're able to do because of our experience is apply context to those very vague headings. So what we tend to find is that, and under section 17 as well, we would also look at the parenting capacity. Now, parenting capacity, when it's read by a typical safeguarding social worker, would be your capacity to parent a child effectively would be safeguarding. But actually in that section, what we end up writing more often than not is, hang on a minute, little Johnny's got full-time one-to-one in a special school to keep him safe, but you're expecting mum to deal with 3 kids in a family home, which is not specifically safety oriented, and then blaming her when they have accidents. So that's, you know, we can't grow an extra 2 pair of hands. So that is bringing that context in. And what we usually do as well is section 17 can cover some of the parent care needs, but I would never, I very rarely assess parent care needs per se, because actually, if all the needs are met, the social care needs of the young person by and educational needs of the young person are met in a proper EHCP, parent care needs will reduce exponentially.
Yeah.
I realised I am monologuing like hell tonight. Sorry.
That's fine. David's divergent. You're a divergent. Yeah, so you interlinking set of assessments and laws and everything. And I think the problem is, you know, you might have one area where they sort of follow things, and then another area where people don't even know they're entitled to something. Because of these disparities, the interlinking nature doesn't quite marry up, does it? So like you said, if child's needs are met in the EHCP, are going to exponentially increase because life is going to be. But then you have this extra complicated thing where you look at things like services. If you're EHCP, then you've gone through a traumatic experience in school, because let's face it, the education system is horrible when you're neurodivergent.
Yeah.
Support, but there's not really any. Don't do anything useful. You know,
we can and do comment on that. We can and do comment on that, because fundamentally, you know, emotional kind of well-being is part of the Common Assessment Framework. So one of the biggest things that I end up commenting on a lot, and I know it's the same for you guys because I put it in the template, about talking therapies for alexithymic young people. So we tend to recommend, well, it depends on the individual case, obviously, but by the time we get to young people or even adults, fundamentally they are highly traumatized, highly alexithymic, and really struggling with interoceptive issues, and then they're pushed into talking therapies and then wondering why things are getting worse and not better. So we talk a lot about that, and therapies that are based around doing. We talk about the need for actually making sure that the environment is fine and that the sensory needs are met before we even think about therapy, because actually that does improve mental health massively. We always recommend specifically autistic mentoring rather than mental health, but because the reason is CAMHS kills kids.
Written about that.
Have. So I feel like if I was recommending any kind of specific mental health provision for an autistic young person, I'm potentially putting them in harm's way.
I think if we're honest as well, Tanya, we are at the moment doing a lot more direct work following the assessments, because David, we're not able to use CAMHS at the moment. we're having difficulties with CAMS because some of the provisions there that aren't appropriate, and any other services at the moment. I mean, it's really quite a massive issue. So Tanya and I are finding that we are doing a lot more direct work with families, aren't we? Which is you know, it's difficult because in a way because we can't meet everyone's needs long term. You know, we need provisions in the communities.
Yeah, so we do end up doing that quite a bit, and we try not to case hold because we fundamentally just don't have time. But there are cases that are called complex. So that's what you call me, isn't it, David? Like a complex presentation specialist. But we don't
really know what else to call you.
Yeah, so it's always complex.
I think one of the problems, though, and the reason why someone might call you a complex presentation specialist is because there is a huge sort of neuronormativity problem in mental health education. Like you were saying, you know, for example, a lot of provision is neurodivergent people because it assumes that we all have this particular way of thinking, feeling, behaving, and we don't. So you know, we've got interoceptive differences. You know, we may be alexithymics, so we asking us how we feel, that's a opening a can of worms, to be honest. You know, asking us to talk through how we emotionally process things. Like if we can't regulate those emotions, those talks are going to be fundamentally flawed. And it all together to create that minority stress, doesn't it? Because you've got that, you know, you've got the social care world, which, like you said, is down to the skill of the assessor. If the assessor knows anything about neurodivergence, you're not going to get anything useful from it. You've got the world of mental health, which is basically inaccessible at this point. I know we were talking before, but when it comes to children, education seems to be at the root of just about everything that goes on with neurodivergent kids. You know, you can normally trace it back to a really horrible school placement. You know, and this it sounds a lot of this could be fixed by more neurodivergent competent, but there's a lot of work that isn't there.
Well, yeah, and this is the thing. There is no one size. I mean, Autism 101 that I do, I think that the shortest amount of time I managed to deliver it in is probably 3.5 hours. And that's just touching on things.
And that doesn't guarantee that the person attending that training is going to be competent after those does it.
Oh God, no. I mean, how long have we worked together now, Rach? And you even still say like Jesus Christ. I still didn't know that, you know.
About 2.5 years, and then working with neurodivergent children and young people for like over 20 years, and still learning every day.
Yeah, and that's why it's important. So, and it's like, what is competence? Like, how competent should somebody be? Like, where is that level of competence? Because ideally, I would love everybody to know what I know, but
I find it difficult because a lot of people ask me this, well, what would it look like? And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, how do you give years and years of experience? How on earth do you do that? I mean, I know we do a lot of mentoring with professionals sometimes, don't we? So quite an in-depth we need new training programs, more in-depth, but with some mentoring in there as well. I think that theory to practice element. So it's we miss some of those elements, if you know what I mean. It's I feel like it's not there at the moment because, like I said earlier on, I ask a lot of local authority staff and health staff, show me your training, show me what training you've all done, so I can understand why there's such an issue. And it's basic, but just going on a training course for 3 days, if you're lucky, because sometimes it tends to be just a few hours. Even that, you could go on a week, I think, Tanya, and you wouldn't have the competency, would you? It's really tough to think, well, how would that work better?
This was brought up in the, I think it was either the Spectrum of Opportunities or Spectrum of Possibilities government research that they did into social care and autism. It was primarily focused on children, but actually what they were saying is that when they had specialist social workers.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Literally specialist, because isn't there are, well, one specialist team in the UK, social work team, is it one?
I think it's Barnet have got a specialist one, haven't they? Maybe?
I'm not sure where it is, so that we'd like to find out a bit more about that.
Yeah, I know it's in London somewhere that they've got like a specialist neurodivergence team. But again, like being specialist, how many clinical psychologists have you met that haven't got a bloody clue what they're talking about?
Oh, and this is another thing. What someone's just commented. What teachers get half-day training? A lot of teachers have told me that.
Yeah,
that's really concerning.
Can you remember when we had the student?
Yes, student teacher. Yeah.
I basically just
mind blown for 3 weeks.
I basically just monologued at her for about 4 hours, and she was like completely mind blown, wasn't she? It's just it's not there, you know. They're still thinking that autistic people can't be autistic if they make eye contact or they have like a decent IQ. Or
I still see that. I can't even read it without going, oh, no.
Oh, what's the other one? Oh,
so
sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say about how you use mentoring. You know, you recommend mentoring by an autistic person more than you would do, traditional health support. And I wanted to comment from Simon Hodgson that says talking to someone helps me understand, contextualize a situation. And I know for me as a mentor, that when I do my mentoring work, that's a lot of what I do. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about where mentoring this social care world, because social care is ultimately trying to lessen well-being. So, when might you be recommending a mentor?
Well, for a start, when we get to adults and young people, the world, we forget that, like, we are incredibly privileged to be part of this, like, kind of wonderful community, online community of autistic people that has pretty neutral understanding of what autistic experience is. It's pretty neutral. I mean, everybody is like, oh no, the neurodiversity movement is so positive and it's ignoring all the negatives. It's really not. It's just neutral. And when you look at something that's neutral and then accuse it of being positive, well, that's the shitty starting point that we were at. So, when we get to people, they've usually got a pretty hefty case of internalized ableism because of what the environment that they've been in has kind of done to them, or they don't fully understand. They may know that they're autistic and they're different, but they've no idea what that means. Again, we've got double empathy. So I said, it helps him to contextualize his emotions and stuff. Well, if you're talking to Mr. Neuronormative ableist person that doesn't share your neurology, chances are it's not going to help you contextualize your emotions at all. It's just going to make you sit there confused, wondering what the bloody hell he's talking about. So there's several, and also just being kind of like, I don't want to say role model because that's a pretty crappy thing to say, but that there are autistic adults and older autistic people that did survive it as well. Because I think when, especially when you're growing and when you're young, or even when you're older, and I think we spoke about this with Tigger, didn't we? You spoke about this with Tigger about baby auties and autistic elders, because Tigger, even though he's like in his 50s, is a baby autie because he's newly discovered. And autistic elders can be like 20 years your junior. So it's learning from somebody with that lived experience. You can't replace lived experience. And I think that if somebody, like the mentors that we usually recommend, do understand the newer theory, they do understand things like monotropism, like double empathy, like alexithymia, like sensory differences, interoception, things like burnout and atypical burnout, things that aren't yet in the books and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, peer support is important too, but mentoring, I think fundamentally, when anybody comes into the autistic community, even if it's online, they are mentored by the people that have been there longer. So we're just kind of speed that process up of acceptance and of going of those light bulb moments and that self-understanding. And that really only comes with having a mentor that is more experienced at you and than you, and has probably been through some of the stuff that they're going through.
Autistic communication.
Yeah.
I very much, people doing mentoring, they need to have some knowledge of, advocacy as well, because when you are mentoring someone, very often as they come to understand themselves more, they'll be going, wait a minute, like I was entitled to this, or this was done and this was wrong. And you find yourself teach them how to go back through things where they've been, try and correct it as best as possible. And I find, a lot of people, for me, a lot of people will come to me and ask for mentoring, and I go, well, actually, what you need is advocacy. Like,
and that's part and parcel. I mean, it's like Rachel was saying, we do an awful lot more. Well, I say we do. It tends to be me more than anybody. Do like a lot more. Would you call it kind of like crisis intervention direct work? Because nobody can do it. That sounds really big-headed. Nobody will do it, I don't think. Or nobody, like, people just scratch their head and go, no, they're not engaging. I don't know what to do. Well, things like that.
I think we often found there's someone who would have had 10, 12 more assessments, but they're never actually getting the support that they need. So that's when we started finding we tend to do that, putting what's needed in terms of the support that's recommended in practice. So we've ended up quite accidentally looking more at the direct work, really.
Just because it's needed. So I've started to call myself Nanny McPhee, really. So I only do it for very short. I do it for a very short amount of time, because there's no way that I'd be able to get round everybody. But to be able to impart that knowledge that is needed in that particular crisis moment, it would be too late by the time that we were able to do it. And that's really what's needed. And that for me, like, when I'm working directly with a family, it is a whole family, not just the person.
Yeah.
The whole
I think someone's just mentioned that in the comments about that she realized how much mentoring would help her as well. I think we're doing a lot more of that really at the moment, I would say.
A lot more mentoring,
yeah. So totally, mentoring is critical.
And I think everybody thinks it's just mentoring, but it's not. I mean, a lot of my direct work is care and support planning. It is advocacy. It's liaising with like MDTs. It's educating along the way. It's also mentoring other people that are going to come in and educating people that are going to work with whoever that we're working with at the time. It is family therapy in a way. It's remind all of a sudden like waiting for the penny to drop with parents that they're also neurodivergent. It's a lot of historical trauma in terms of parent blame and accusations of FII or mental health. It's breakdowns of relationships. It's not having the support that you need and you are legally entitled to has such devastating effect on families. And I think specifically in terms of children, I think there's this common misunderstanding that having autistic kids like breaks families apart or ruins families, and it's not the kids that do it, it's the services or lack of.
Absolutely, 100%.
I think also, sorry, carry on.
No, carry on, David.
Well, I was just going to say, mentoring does take this depending on who you're mentoring as well.
Yeah.
If you're mentoring an autistic person, like in a role of people, you're often it's not really teaching, it's more of a helping them explore their own themselves. And, you know, you can have that advocacy element as they learn more and start to realize where the world has done them wrong. But I find when you're working with sort of an autism professional, I hate that term, often it is...
I know, yeah, we're all autism professionals, the irony.
But it's more of a teaching experience when you're working with those kinds of professionals, because so often they'll come to you to an autism awareness. They just won't know it. Right, okay, here are and they're going to take you a long time to learn. And then once you learn those 5 years of research, you can wrap your head around.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And it's not autism professionals with level 2 qualifications either. It's literally doctors and head of CCD,
psychiatrists, doctors. We're training them all in Midtown.
They literally sit their head scratching. Honestly, I attend meetings to advocate or as a professional, like involved in some kind of process, some social care process, and end up thinking I should be invoicing for training.
I should have been clearer, really, when I said with their level 2 and autism talking about the knowledge level that they have. I thought that would put it in perspective for people.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a sticky one. Social care is, it really is, and there are so many elements to it as well. You know, I mean, the adult social care kind of criteria looks quite straightforward. Even the children's social care criteria looks quite straightforward, but it's the context that's then applied to that criteria. You know, then we've got capacity. That's some whole other bullshit. You know? But yeah, and then obviously you've got safeguarding. So you've got early help, you've got child in need, you've got child in need for disability, you've got child protection, then you've got public law outline, then you've got family court, which all is social care. What else is under social care? Then we've got court of protection, haven't we, Rach? That's under social care.
Yeah.
Mental health.
You've got Mental Health Act, Mental Capacity Act, you've got the Care Act, you've got Social Services Wellbeing Act. There's just tons. There's absolutely tons. And the court of protection, that's a major one as well. You've got deprivation of liberty safeguards, which is soon move into liberty protection safeguards. There's a lot. There's a lot under social care. Yeah.
Just to put it in perspective as well, like my training is as an independent mental health advocate. I know the Mental Health Act pretty well, and I still have to go away and look things up. Impossible, like just that part, the Mental Health Act. It's impossible to memorize everything you need to know. My computer's full of things like the code of practice, all sorts, you know, there's just so much that you have to know just for that one bit. So when you add all these different parts together, you know, Mental Capacity Act, the way the court of protection works, like there are so many social care.
Yeah, and
that's another issue as well. Got to have that experience together. So how the Mental Capacity Act and how the Mental Health Act work together, and you've got to know all of that if you're going to be a safe
Yeah. And here's the thing, like no one person can know all of those things, and that's why people end up kind of like inadvertently specializing. So like Rachel is mental health, learning disability and mental capacity stuff and Mental Health Act stuff, aren't you? Like that is your kind of bread and butter.
Protection, a lot of that,
so even though like obviously she does like children's and adults and all the other stuff, like that's kind of her specialism. So
16 plus basically
16 plus, so we all end up specializing in different areas, and that's why it's important to work together.
My favorite part,
children under 16 as well.
My favorite part of the Mental Health Act, of course, is that you have, you know, the sections and everything. Then you got the code. And I was, you know, live, you know, 93% of under 18s in inpatient treatment are autistic. Yet if you read the specifically says it's rarely helpful or suitable for autistic people. So there's some of the material that's out there, it doesn't even necessarily get followed. So you're there like trying to say, well, this is what it is. And they're like, but we're still
one to be aware of as well on that note, David, for everyone listening, is the health bill, which is in draft at the moment. That's going to look at things very differently in terms of autistic people accessing mental health services in inpatient settings. So that draft was drafted in June 2022. So if you have a look at that, so it's a draft mental health bill, and you'll see a lot of relevant community within that draft, and it's just going through Parliament. So I'm expecting that to hopefully be achieved and concluded probably by 2025. Based on what people are saying at the moment.
I've had a brief look in the draft, and I know there's talk about, what basically making it so that autistic people are less easily placed into inpatient settings. I feel like that could be a double-edged sword.
If you look at the original, so that the criteria, the mental disorder is the criteria, isn't it, with the risk to others, risk to yourself. It's not that different, really, in the draft, or would you disagree, Dave?
It's not usually different, but they do keep what I read in that for the purposes of this be classed as mental, but I don't know, I need to read more on this, I think, before I can fully comment on it. It's always alarming change, because you never know what direction it's going to go in.
As the massively practical person who loves the theory, policy, law into practice, I just want to ask a really obvious question. Because we have no educational facilities, and because we have no specialist school placements, and because we have no social care, so they're all right saying it's going to be harder to detain autistic people, but where the fuck are they going to put the ones that are detained now?
There's some information in the report on that as well. So anyone detained under the previous, well, it's still in place now, but the Mental Health Act, they'd have a statutory right to request some advanced choice document is drawn up. So the same as David, needs to read a little bit more into it, really. But the main changes are, I'm thinking back now, autism and learning disabilities in the draft. Or learning disability would not be considered to be conditions for which a person could be subject to compulsory treatment under Section 3. So
I believe they also said that they can only be put under Section 2 if there is a co-occurring disorder that would class as mental illness. I'm trying to remember what I read.
A new definition, isn't it, of appropriate medical treatment is the new definition.
Yeah.
But it's kind of similar anyway to the current criteria, because they'll take that out. But if the criteria is looking at if that person's a risk to themselves or others, then an AMP's going to be looking still at the same thing, aren't they? It's not really that different.
Yeah, but how much autism and co-occurring diagnoses of personality disorder is going to go up off the back of this? Because they'll just look for an excuse to, and personality disorder is the easiest one to give, isn't it? In fact, it could probably de-diagnose autism. That's already happening.
Personality disorder is one of the major cohort of people who end up in facilities. So, I wonder how that. Know that there's choice documents anyway, because I know because I'm as a patient as well, and because I was in a for a time, when I came out had to fill out an advanced choice thing which specified how I wanted to be treated should this sort of thing ever happen again. Very much said I don't want to go back in an inpatient unit because I came out worse than I went in. But
they're the worst environments.
I wonder, part of me keeps wondering, the more I learn, how much of of this sort of draft lip service that isn't dramatic of difference.
I'm a bit cynical, so I have been studying it like you wouldn't believe, and it's just some of it feels just a little bit reworded to me, but not all.
Regurgitating the same shit.
There are some positives in it. They're concentrating more on the risk. So rather than someone's diagnosis, it seems to be concentrating more on the risk threshold of harm to self, harm to others as well. So yeah, we'll see what comes of it.
So this is what does me, right? So do you know if I've got child protection hat on, right?
Mm.
And I'm looking at the criteria for barely good enough or significant harm. And then I'm looking through a mental health lens and I'm thinking of all the things that social care would potentially do in order to keep a family together, i.e. 24/7 reunification, you know, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Why the fuck is it, and I said fug, not fuck. Oh God. Why the hell is it inpatients or half an hour meeting with the crisis team every couple of 3 days? There's no in between.
No, and then you've got a lot. I mean, I'm reading about it all the time. I'm meeting a lot of people who've been detained and in a setting for a long time, and then because there's the issue within the community that the services are not necessarily there. There's lots of different reasons, really. So the bill is meant to reduce that. So,
but shouldn't social care be picking that up in terms of like caring in the home? So if you're physically disabled and you need carers,
yeah,
you can get them. So isn't there an element of mental health care that should be happening within the home?
There's aftercare services, Section 117, aftercare services. If someone, you know, obviously it depends. There's a lot of different elements, criteria wise.
Do you see what I'm saying?
But that and any kind of mental health services, yeah, just not necessarily.
But why is that not there? Because surely the cost of detaining somebody in inpatient services is astronomical.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So surely providing that level of care within the community, and we've been in situations where, you know, we've had to like consider making a home safe for somebody who may be a risk to themselves or others in order to avoid inpatients because of what it does to autistic people. Why are they not doing that?
I mean, I would certainly say that, you know, when it comes to health and inpates, there can be somewhat of the proverbial, you know, rotating door where people go in and out and in and out. And I think it comes down to the 117 aftercare, which, you know, for the purposes of the people listening, you might not know, Section 117 aftercare is what after you have been detained under Section 2 and 3. And I think there's a few other sections.
It's not under Section 2.
I thought you've been sectioned, isn't it? You're in Section 117 aftercare. Once again, like I said, everything off the top of my head.
Section 3.
But the point is this,
I went through that recently with somebody.
But this aftercare, it's not good, and they wonder why people go in and out of inpatient units constantly.
Yeah, and they don't even answer the bloody phone at the crisis team.
Crisis lines, yeah. There's one number you can guarantee no one will answer. Experience.
Section 117 I find is critical. But then because it's a joint approach as well, really, from health and from health and social care. Yeah, after Section 3, yeah.
Is it really a joint affair though, from health and social care?
It is that it's a joint.
It should be.
It should be, yeah.
But what does it really look like in truth? But this is the same with all services, isn't it? You know, even if we bring it back to like EHCPs, like, you know, EHCPs where the family haven't been able to fight or appeal or get independent assessments aren't worth the paper they're written on. So maybe that's the same with like health as well. Yeah.
Okay, well, wrapping up soon because we've gone off on a massive. So here's a question for both of you. A question for both of you to wrap things up. Moving forward, if you could sort of change something in social care to make it better for neurodivergence, and you had to pick just like one or two things, what do you think should be the priorities to bring social care into the 21st century?
Oh, one.
Blow it up and start again.
I would say competency, so professional competency, but that would be back to the training and mentoring. It needs an overhaul in terms of that.
Yeah.
I mean, just starting from, and that's still your basics, just starting from that.
Yeah.
I think I would have to go with the same, but I think that competence also includes things like really undoing systemic ableism. You can't be competent if you are holding on to outdated medical model, ableist kind of views. And I think that you can't get rid of that without the historical context of how that knowledge has been produced and how the misinformation about neurodivergence has been produced. And it, like, that sounds like a little bit extra. Like, do people really need to know that, or do they just need to know about it? Double empathy.
I think
yeah,
so.
actually, yeah, they do. They do. They need to know about refrigerating.
I've literally just written about it, and honestly, I could have cried all the way through writing about it. I mean, I was like, you can just from reading what I've written, you can see where we are.
Yeah, refrigerator mothers never stopped. No, and medical model done a lot of damage, even though like the World Health Organization recognizes the societal attitudes impact on neurodivergent people.
In however many years from now, 100 years from now, we are all going to look back at times now, and we're going to be mortified.
Yeah, by the way that we treat specifically autistic mothers.
Yeah.
And autistic children.
Yeah.
It's disgusting.
Well, thank you for this part one of neurodivergence and social care. I'm going to go away and brush off because I was sure that section 2 was entitled section 117, and I know I'm wrong. So
yeah, in order to move on to section 3, yeah, but yeah.
Yeah, so I'm definitely going to go away and rebrush up on my sections of the Mental Health Act, and I hope everyone else watching has learned plenty from. So yeah,
that's the entire webinar in itself.
Yeah, things to look out for. Tanya and I are giving a seminar for Autistic Parents UK on the 9th of August at, is it 7 p.m. British summertime? And that's going to be on autistic. Well, it's going to be on burnout, isn't it?
Well, burnout and all the stuff that's not in the books, burnout.
Yeah, it's so a everything. really in-depth seminar.
Heavy one.
Yeah, it's heavy going. Worth coming along. So do check that out on Autistic Parents UK. And
we've sent that to every statutory service in the UK.
You should do it.
Just send it out.
Yeah. Tomorrow as well, me, Rachel, and Mary Cartledge are with the Nurture program. Jodie, is it from the Nurture program? We're doing a live Q&A, but we're doing it closed as well. So the reason we're doing it like closed in a private Zoom is because obviously social care questions is obviously quite a lot of personal stuff that comes up sometimes. So that's why we decided to do it closed. I think we're going to be doing that probably monthly or bi-monthly. So look out for that on the ND social care page. And I think you've shared it on your page as well, haven't you, David? And it's also in the Stand Support Through a Neurodivergent Lens group and on the Nurture program page if you want to join that and ask some questions. What else are we doing? And we'll probably do some more of this, like ranting about social care and stuff.
Yeah, and if we need more focused webinars, like David, if we wanted to do one on the Mental Health Act, I could do that. I could, whatever. If we've got something that lots of families are asking questions about, struggling with. I could make them more focused as well if needed.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So yeah. And
Yeah.
so it's
Okay. Next week, David's Divergence will be talking with Jacek Wade of Queer Cult. We'll be talking around substance use. So really one of my most focused interests, because like it's pretty much all like 5 years I was writing. So yeah, 2 weeks. The event's already up on Facebook, and this time it will go live to Facebook, because I think when we connected it to a certain group on Facebook, it killed the connection to the Facebook pages. Thank you everyone for coming and listening. Thank you for joining in, and we'll catch you next time. This has been discussion, so thank you.
awkward
Bye.
wave. Awkward wave.